Have you ever received a phone call so casual, so completely unbothered, that the cruelty of it didn't hit you until after you'd already hung up? That's how it started for me. Not with a fight. Not with a confrontation. With a phone call from my mother at 11:47 on a Wednesday night, while I was sitting in my car on level 3 of the Northwestern Memorial Hospital parking garage, still in my scrubs, my coffee cold in the cup holder, the fluorescent light above me flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay on. I had just finished a 14-hour shift. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I'd eaten. She said, and I remember this word for word because I have replayed it approximately 400 times since, she said, "Mara, honey, we just need you to sign one paper. It's nothing. It'll take 5 minutes. One paper. My house. My name is Mara Calloway. I'm 31 years old. I'm a billing compliance analyst at a hospital system in Chicago, which is a job title that sounds boring at dinner parties but means, in practice, that I spend my days detecting financial fraud in medical billing, catching the exact kind of paperwork manipulation that most people never even know exists. I notice things. Dates that don't match. Signatures that shift. Numbers that appear twice when they should appear once. I bought my house in Bridgeport, a 3-bedroom brick 2-flat on West 32nd Street, 4 years ago for $218,000. I put down $43,600 of my own money, a down payment I had saved over 6 years while working 3 jobs. My full-time analyst position, weekend shifts doing medical billing for a private practice in Oak Park, and 2 years of overnight transcription work that I did from my kitchen table between midnight and 3 a.m. so that I could afford to live somewhere that was mine. I painted every wall in that house myself. I refinished the floors in the upstairs bedroom over a single long weekend in October with a YouTube tutorial and a rented sander. I planted a small garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, basil, one very stubborn rosemary bush, because I wanted something living that I had chosen and tended on my own terms. That house was not just property. It was the first thing in my entire life that belonged completely to me. So when my mother called at 11:47 p.m. to ask me to sign one paper, to transfer the deed of that house so that my 27-year-old unemployed brother Tyler could take his girlfriend to Cancún for 2 weeks, I did something that surprised even me. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I said very quietly, "Let me think about it, Mom," and I hung up. And then I sat in that parking garage for 22 minutes, watching the fluorescent light flicker. And I thought about the folder sitting on my kitchen counter at home. The manila folder with the rubber band around it. The one I had been quietly, carefully building for the last 18 months. Thought they have no idea. And for the first time in a very long time I smiled. I want to be careful here because I know how these stories can sound from the outside. Bitter daughter. Difficult woman. Couldn't just keep the peace. So let me be specific. Because the truth of my family is not something I need to exaggerate. It only needs to be accurately described. The Calloway family operated, for as long as I can remember, according to one organizing principle. Tyler's comfort was the budget. Everything else, including me, was a line item that could be adjusted. My brother Tyler is 4 years younger than me. He is not a bad person in the way that villains are bad. He is bad in the quieter, more expensive way. The way of someone who has never once been told no by the people who were supposed to love him enough to say it. He has held, by my count, 11 jobs since he was 19. He has never held one longer than 7 months. At the time of this story, he had been unemployed for 14 months and was living in my parents' house in Bridgeport Heights, 38 minutes from my front door. My parents, Bob and Diane Calloway, are not monsters either. They are something harder to name, people who loved imperfectly and consistently in one direction, and simply never noticed what that cost the person standing slightly to the left. Let me give you 3 examples. Because I think you need to understand the pattern before you can understand the folder. The first, when I was 17, my parents sat me down and told me that the $12,000 they had saved in my college fund, the account my grandmother had contributed to every Christmas since I was 4, was going to be used to buy Tyler a car. a 2007 Honda Civic, which he crashed 8 months later. The explanation my mother gave me was that Tyler needed reliable transportation to get to school. I pointed out carefully that I also needed a college fund to get to college. She said, "Mara, you're smart. You'll figure it out." I did figure it out. I took out $34,000 in student loans that I spent the next 9 years repaying. The second, I graduated from the University of Illinois at Chicago on a Thursday morning in May with a 3.8 GPA. My parents did not attend. Tyler had what my mother described as a really rough week. He had broken up with a girlfriend, and she felt he needed them home. I walked across that stage, shook the dean's hand, took my own photograph outside the auditorium on a self-timer, and drove myself to a diner on Michigan Avenue where I ate a Belgian waffle alone and told myself it didn't matter. Mattered. The third. In my second year working at the hospital, my parents called me with what they described as an emergency. My father had a gap in his health insurance between jobs and needed $3,200 to cover a procedure. Had it. I gave it to them within 48 hours. I never asked for a repayment schedule because I didn't want to be the kind of daughter who made her parents feel ashamed. That was 6 years ago. It has never been mentioned since. Not the debt, not the gratitude, not a single word. When I brought it up once, gently, at a holiday dinner, my mother looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "Mara, family doesn't keep score."
I learned something important in that moment. She was wrong. Family absolutely keeps score. The only question is who's doing the keeping, and whether they're doing it on paper. I had started doing it on paper. Not because I planned revenge. Not because I was building a case file in some cinematic sense. But because I worked in fraud detection. Because I had learned, professionally and personally, that memory is unreliable and documentation is not. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, beneath every holiday dinner and every unanswered text and every, "You're so capable, Mara, you don't need help," somewhere beneath all of that, I had always known that this family's dysfunction would eventually cost me something I couldn't afford to lose. I just didn't know it would be my house. That was the moment I stopped trying to be their daughter and started being their opponent. The dinner was on a Sunday in March. My mother made pot roast, which she only does for occasions. I remember noticing that when I walked in, the smell of it, the good dishes out, the table extended with the extra leaf. I thought perhaps someone was celebrating something. I thought perhaps, for one unguarded moment, it was me.
It was not me.
There were 8 people at that table. My parents.
Tyler.
Tyler's girlfriend, Kayla, who I had met exactly twice. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's older sister. Her husband. 2 cousins visiting from out of state who I barely knew. We were halfway through the meal when my father cleared his throat in the way he does when he's about to say something he has already rehearsed. He said, "We have some exciting news." Tyler grinned. Kayla looked at the table. My father said that Tyler and Kayla were planning a trip to Cancún. 2 weeks. A resort in the hotel zone. He actually named it the Hyatt Ziva, which I would later look up and find starts at $420 a night. He said it was going to be good for Tyler. That Tyler had been working through some things. That he deserved a reset. I nodded. I thought, they're going to ask me to contribute. Maybe a few $100s. Then my mother said, and I will never forget the way she said it, the way she smoothed her napkin across her lap, the way she didn't quite meet my eyes. "We're going to use Mara's house to cover it." The table went quiet. I said, "I'm sorry?" My father said they had already spoken to a real estate agent. That the house could be listed quickly given the market. That they had looked into the numbers, and a short sale would net enough to cover the trip, pay off some of Tyler's credit card debt, and leave a little left over. He said it like he was describing a reasonable logistical solution. He said it like the house was a savings account they had temporarily forgotten to access. My Aunt Patricia looked at her plate. I said, very carefully, "That's my house. My name is on the deed. I bought it. I live in it." My mother said, "Mara, we're not asking you to be homeless. You can rent. You're good at figuring things out. There it was again. You're good at figuring things out. The sentence they had used to justify every theft of resource, every absence, every loan unpaid. As if my competence was a license for their extraction. Tyler said, and he said this with the particular confidence of someone who has never once faced a consequence. It's not like it's your forever home, Mara. You're single. You don't need 3 bedrooms. My cousin from out of state laughed. Just once. A small, uncomfortable sound that he tried to swallow back. My father said, "We've actually already had some interest from a buyer. We'd need your signature on the transfer paperwork by the end of the month." I want to tell you that I erupted, that I stood up, knocked back my chair, told all 8 of them exactly what I thought. That would make a more satisfying story in this moment. But that is not what I did. What I did was pick up my fork, cut a piece of pot roast, put it in my mouth, chew it slowly, and then I said, "Let me look over the paperwork." My mother's shoulders dropped with relief. My father nodded like it was settled. Tyler reached across the table and took the last dinner roll. No one looked at me again for the rest of the meal, which was fine. Because what no one at that table knew, what not one of those 8 people had any reason to suspect, was that I had not agreed to anything. What I had done was buy myself 72 hours. And the folder on my kitchen counter had been waiting for exactly this moment. That was the moment everything shifted. I want to tell you about the folder. Not what was in it yet, I'll get to that, but what it felt like to have it. Because I think that's the part people don't talk about when they talk about moments like this. It wasn't power, exactly. It wasn't confidence. It was something quieter than both of those things. It felt like knowing the ending of a movie that everyone else was still watching. I had started the folder 18 months before that Sunday dinner. Not because of a dramatic discovery. Not because of a single moment of betrayal. But because of a Tuesday afternoon in September when I was reviewing a routine title search on an unrelated property file for work. We occasionally cross-reference public county records as part of our compliance audits, and I saw something that made my stomach drop completely still. My name, my address, and attached to it, filed through the Cook County Recorder of Deeds office, a power of attorney document authorizing my father, Robert Allen Calloway, to act on my behalf in all real estate matters. I had never signed that document. I want you to understand what I do for a living. I am a billing compliance analyst. I spend 8 to 10 hours a day looking at financial documents, cross-referencing signatures, flagging anomalies in authorization chains. I have testified in 2 internal fraud proceedings. I know what a forged document looks like with the same instinct that a sommelier knows when a wine is turned, not from dramatic inspection, but from a quiet, immediate wrongness that hits before you've even consciously processed it. The signature on that power of attorney was close. Whoever had done it, and I already knew who had done it, had practiced.
The loop on the M was right. The way I trailed the A into the R was almost correct. But the pressure pattern was wrong. The pen had hesitated twice in places where I never hesitate. And the notarization stamp, a detail most people would never examine, was from a notary in Elmhurst whose license I would later discover had lapsed 4 months before the document was supposedly signed. I sat at my work desk for 4 minutes without moving. Then I pulled up the Cook County Property Records portal, typed in my address on West 32nd Street, and began reading every filing associated with my deed going back to the date of purchase. What I found over the following 3 weeks was this. The forged power of attorney had been filed 14 months earlier. It had not yet been used to transfer the deed, but it had been used once, unsuccessfully, to attempt a refinancing inquiry through a mortgage broker in Skokie, who had apparently requested additional documentation and never received it. The inquiry had gone cold, but the paper trail existed. There was also an email. This is the part that I still find almost impossible to believe in its carelessness, except that I have learned in my professional life that people who commit financial fraud within families almost always make careless mistakes, because they never genuinely believe the person they are stealing from will look. The email came to me by accident. My mother had forwarded a message meant for my father, a thread with a real estate agent named Denise Kowalski, operating out of a brokerage in Bridgeport. In the thread, my mother had described the property, had given the address, had said, and I am paraphrasing only slightly, "Our daughter is cooperative. We expect to have the paperwork finalized within the next few months." I was described as cooperative, in a plan I had not been informed of. I forwarded that email to a dedicated folder in a secondary email account I created that same afternoon. I printed a physical copy and placed it in a manila envelope. I labeled the envelope with a date and a single word: documentation. Over the following 18 months, I added to that envelope quietly and consistently. I obtained a certified copy of the forged power of attorney from the Recorder of Deeds. I requested the lapsed notary's license records through the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, a public records request that cost me $15 and took 3 weeks. I contacted the mortgage broker in Skokie, posing as a compliance researcher, which was not entirely untrue, and confirmed in writing that an inquiry had been initiated using the fraudulent POA. I kept the correspondence. I also did one more thing. I found Denise Kowalski, the real estate agent. I did not confront her. I did not call her. I simply located her professional email through her brokerage's website and sent her a single, measured message identifying myself as the legal owner of the property on West 32nd Street and noting that I had become aware of some unauthorized inquiries regarding the listing of my home and that I would appreciate being kept informed of any future communications regarding the property. She called me back within 4 hours. She was, to her credit, immediately alarmed. She had not known the property was being listed without the owner's knowledge or consent. She had believed my parents when they described themselves as managing the property on behalf of their daughter. She became, without ever intending to, my earliest witness. Thanked her. I asked her to document our conversation in writing and send it to my personal email. She did. I put that email in the folder too. By the time my father cleared his throat at that Sunday dinner and announced that they had already had some interest from a buyer, he was describing a transaction that had been documented, witnessed, and legally flagged in a folder that was sitting on my kitchen counter 11 miles away. They thought they were stealing from a daughter. They forgot they raised an analyst. I drove home from that Sunday dinner at 8:43 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked it when I pulled into my garage, the garage of my house, the house I had painted and sanded and planted tomatoes behind, and I sat there for a moment with the engine off, listening to the specific silence of a decision already made. I did not feel rage. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect rage at this point in a story like this, and the absence of it might seem cold. But rage was not what I felt. What I felt was something closer to clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when you have been half expecting something for a long time and it has finally, formally, announced itself. I went inside. I made tea, English breakfast, 2 minutes steep, a habit I developed during my overnight transcription years because it was gentler than coffee at 1 a.m. I sat at my kitchen table with the manila folder in front of me and I read through every document one more time. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to enter the next phase of this having looked at it clearly, completely, without flinching. Then I made a list. I am a list person by nature and by training. When a situation is complex and emotionally charged, a list is the most honest thing you can produce. It removes the noise. It shows you what is actually true versus what you are afraid of. My list had 4 items. 1. Contact my attorney. 2. File a deed protection hold with the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. 3. Report the forged power of attorney to the Illinois Attorney General's office. 4. Notify the buyer's agent. I did not put confront my parents on the list. That was not an oversight. Monday morning at 8:15 a.m. I called Renata Osebonsu, the attorney who had handled my home purchase 4 years earlier and with whom I had stayed in occasional contact. I had emailed her the previous night with a summary of the situation and scanned copies of every document in the folder. When she picked up the phone, the first thing she said was, "Mara, this is a serious file." I said, "I know." She said, "How long have you been sitting on this?" I said, 18 months. There was a pause. Then she said, "Good." We spoke for 40 minutes. She confirmed that the forged power of attorney constituted document fraud under Illinois law, specifically a violation of the Illinois Identity Protection Act and potentially the Illinois financial exploitation of an adult statute, depending on how the Attorney General's office chose to frame the investigation. She said the attempted mortgage refinancing inquiry, even though it had not succeeded, established intent and demonstrated the document had been actively used. She also said something I have thought about many times since. She said, "The email your mother sent, the one describing you as cooperative, that's going to matter. That establishes that they knew you hadn't agreed. That's not a mistake, Mara. That's evidence of premeditation." I asked her how long the process would take. She said, "The deed hold we can file today. The AG referral goes in this week. The rest moves at the speed of government, which means weeks, possibly months, but the hold is immediate. Nobody is moving that property." I said, "File the hold." She filed it before noon. A deed protection hold, formerly called a notice of pendency or a lease pendens, is a public legal notice attached to a property record indicating that the ownership of the property is subject to active legal proceedings. It does not require a court hearing to file. It requires documentation and an attorney. Once filed, it is visible to any title search, which means that any buyer, any lender, any real estate agent conducting due diligence will immediately see that this property is in legal dispute. It effectively makes the property unsellable until the matter is resolved. My mother called me Tuesday afternoon to ask if I'd looked at the paperwork yet. I said, "I'm still reviewing it." She said, "Mara, we're on a bit of a timeline." I said, "I understand. I'll be in touch." Wednesday evening my father called. He said the buyer was eager and the agent needed an answer. I told him I appreciated the update and that I was being thorough. He sighed in the particular way he sighs when he believes I am being unnecessarily complicated, and he said, "You know, Mara, this would mean a lot to Tyler." I said, "I know, Dad." I attended the following Sunday dinner. I brought a bottle of wine, a Coates du Rhone $22 from the shop on Halsted. I sat at the table. I passed the rolls. I asked Tyler how things were going. I smiled at the right moments. My Aunt Patricia watched me from across the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between guilt and relief that the moment had apparently passed without incident. None of them knew. The hold had been filed. The AG referral had been submitted. Renata had contacted Denise Kowalski formally, who had provided a written statement within 48 hours. The buyer's attorney had conducted a title search that week and had already flagged the lease pendens to his client. The transaction had been dead for 6 days. My family was still planning the vacation. The most powerful thing I ever did was sit across that dinner table and pass the rolls. The letters arrived on a Friday. I know this because Renata called me at 9:17 a.m. to tell me they had been sent. Certified mail, return receipt required, which meant my parents would have to physically sign for them at the door. She said the Illinois Attorney General's office had moved faster than expected, likely because the forged notarization gave them an immediately verifiable and unambiguous starting point. A lapsed notary stamp is not a gray area. It is not open to interpretation. It is simply wrong, provably wrong, in a way that requires no expert testimony and generates no reasonable doubt. I went to work that Friday. I processed 3 audit files. I ate lunch at my desk. Leftover rice, a clementine, a coffee from the cart on the 2nd floor. I did not check my phone compulsively. I had learned, over 18 months of building that folder, that patience is not the absence of urgency. Patience is what urgency looks like when it has been properly directed. My mother called at 2:34 p.m. I did not answer. She called again at 2:41. I did not answer. 2:58 she sent a text message. It was long. I read it once, set my phone face down on my desk, and finished my audit file. What the certified letters contained, as Renata later walked me through in detail, was the following. A formal notice from the Cook County Circuit Court acknowledging the lease pendants filed on the property at West 32nd Street, Bridgeport, Chicago. My address, and confirming that no transfer, sale, refinancing, or encumbrance of said property could proceed pending legal resolution. A separate notice from the Illinois Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division advising Robert Allen Callaway and Diane Marie Callaway that they were the subjects of a formal fraud investigation related to the filing of a forged power of attorney instrument in Cook County, the use of said instrument in a mortgage inquiry, and the attempted unauthorized sale of property belonging to a third party. The notice advised them to retain legal counsel. It advised them that their financial accounts had been flagged for review pending the outcome of the investigation. It included, as an attachment, a copy of the email my mother had sent to Denise Kowalski, the one describing me as cooperative. My father called at 3:22 p.m., then at 3:45, then at 4:11. Tyler called at 4:30. I did not know Tyler had my work number. He had apparently gotten it from my mother. He left a voicemail, the only call I actually listened to that day, in which he said, in a voice that I had never heard from him before, a voice stripped entirely of its usual casual entitlement. "Mara, what did you do?" Not a question. A recognition. The buyer had already withdrawn from the transaction by Thursday. The title search had made that decision for them before the letters even arrived. Denise Kowalski had removed the listing from MLS on Wednesday afternoon after speaking with her broker's legal team. The $4,200 non-refundable deposit Tyler and my parents had placed on the Cancún resort. Placed, I later learned, before they had even secured my signature, before the transaction had been anything other than a wish, was gone. The vacation was cancelled. My parents spent that weekend, as Renata would later relate to me through a formal communication, consulting with a criminal defense attorney. Their bank accounts were not frozen in the Hollywood sense. The investigation was civil at that stage, with criminal referral pending, but they had been flagged, which meant that any significant financial movement would be scrutinized and potentially held pending inquiry. The practical effect was the same. They could not access funds freely. They could not maneuver. For the first time in my memory, they could not simply spend their way around a consequence. My mother's text message from 2:58 p.m. that Friday had said many things. It had said I was destroying the family. It had said I was vindictive and cruel. It had said that she had only ever tried to do what was best for everyone, and that I had never appreciated what they had sacrificed for me. I read it once, as I said. And then I thought about the $12,000 college fund redirected to a Honda Civic. The graduation I attended alone. The $3,200 I had handed over without asking for a receipt. The 14-hour shift in the flickering parking garage. The pot roast dinner where 8 people watched my parents announce the sale of my property and only one of them, my Aunt Patricia, had looked briefly, guiltily at the tablecloth. I thought about the folder. And then I changed my phone number. I did it through my carrier's app, sitting at my desk at 5:03 p.m. on a Friday, before I shut down my computer and packed my bag and walked out of the hospital into a March evening that was cold and clear and smelled faintly of rain. I drove home. I parked in my garage. My garage, my house, my deed, legally confirmed and protected and unassailable. I went inside, put the kettle on. And while I waited for it to boil, I stood at my kitchen counter and I looked at the folder. Still there, rubber bands still around it, a little thicker now with copies of everything that had been filed, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not triumph. Not relief exactly. Something more like the specific quiet that follows a very long storm. The kind of quiet where you walk outside and the air is different, cleaner, lighter. And you understand that something has genuinely shifted and that it is not coming back. I changed my number that afternoon. It felt like taking off a coat I'd been wearing for 31 years. It is a Saturday morning in April when I write this. Or rather, when I sit with it long enough to finally put it into words. The legal process is not entirely finished. These things rarely are. There are still filings, still scheduled hearings, still a civil proceeding that will take months to fully resolve. Renata calls me every 2 weeks with updates that I listen to carefully and then set aside, because I have learned that the machinery of consequence, once properly set in motion, does not require my constant attention. It only required that I build it correctly. And I did. What is finished, completely, formally, and permanently, is the threat to my house. The deed is in my name. Has always been in my name. 'Twill remain in my name. The lease pendens has been updated to reflect the active investigation, which means the property is legally untouchable by anyone other than me until the proceedings conclude, at which point it will simply be mine again, cleanly and without condition. I know this. I have the paperwork. Keep it in the folder. This particular Saturday, the light comes through my kitchen window at an angle I have always loved. Low and pale gold, the way April light in Chicago can be when it is trying, genuinely trying to become spring. It lands on the kitchen table in a rectangle. My coffee is hot. The rosemary bush in the backyard, the stubborn one, has come back again for the 3rd year in a row, which still surprises me a little, the way resilience sometimes does. I have not spoken to my parents since I changed my number. I have not spoken to Tyler. My Aunt Patricia sent me a card, a physical card, handwritten, mailed to my address, about 3 weeks after everything happened. It said only, "I should have said something at dinner. Sorry. I hope you're well." I read it twice. I put it on my refrigerator with a magnet from a conference I attended in 2022. It is still there. I think it will stay there. I am not angry anymore. I want to be honest about that because I think the absence of anger can seem suspicious in a story like this, like something is being performed, like peace is a costume I have put on for the ending. But it isn't performance. It is just what happens when you stop waiting for people to become what they were never going to be. I grieved my family a long time ago. I grieved them quietly, in increments, over 31 years of graduations attended alone and loans that became gifts and phone calls that were never about me. By the time my father cleared his throat at that dinner table, I had already done most of the mourning. The folder was not rage. The folder was the final practical step in a process of acceptance that had been underway for a very long time. What I have now is simpler and more valuable than anything I was trying to hold on to before. I have a house that is mine. I have a Saturday morning with good light and hot coffee and a rosemary bush that keeps coming back. I have a career that gave me, without ever intending to, exactly the skills I needed to protect myself when it mattered most. I have Renata, who is a genuinely excellent attorney and also, I think, a little proud of me. I have the specific and irreplaceable freedom of knowing that I did not betray myself. I did not sign the paper. I did not shrink. I did not swallow it and move on and spend the next decade quietly reconstructing something they had taken from me while telling myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as being at peace. I kept the receipts instead. And I want to say one more thing before I go. Something I mean genuinely and not as a performance of wisdom at the end of a long story. If you have a family that has taught you that your needs are negotiable, that your accomplishments are useful only when they serve someone else's comfort, that your competence is a resource to be extracted rather than a life to be celebrated, I want you to hear this clearly. That was never the truth about you. The truth about you is the thing you built when no one was watching. The overnight shifts. The loan you gave without asking for a receipt. The graduation you attended alone. The folder you kept because some quiet, clear part of you always knew that your life was worth documenting. You were never the difficult one. You were just the one they forgot to be afraid of. And now they know.